I'd like to talk about the dark night of the soul. This is an email question that a good friend sent me, asking about the dark night of the soul and how that relates to the spiritual awakening process. And it relates, it's integral. For most of us, it will be integral. We can start this discussion with Siddhartha Gautama. We might know him better as the Buddha. So he grew up in an idealistic situation. His father was informed by the palatial sages or wise men that his son would either grow up to be the greatest emperor ever and conquer the world, or he would become a world teacher or the enlightened teacher of the world. To be the enlightened teacher of the world, he would have to give up his position as prince and the material things of life, and instead prioritize the spiritual element, the wisdom. Father, being a king, much preferred that his son become a great emperor, that his son conquer the world. He saw no value in enlightenment. The father was instructed by the sage that if his son was to become a great emperor, he would have to be raised in such a way that his empathy was not stimulated. He would have to be kept from suffering so that he could learn the art of war and conquering and politics without wondering about the suffering of human beings. So the father arranged the perfect environment for his son. He was surrounded by young people, healthy people, creative people, beautiful art, beautiful food, tasty, delicious food, the best of all. And he was not allowed to leave the palace to see people who were aged or diseased or people who were starving or sick. He did not see arguments. He did not see fights. He did not see these things. About the time he was 16, might have been younger, but by the time he was in his teens, he decided his curiosity picked up, his adventure spirit picked up, and he thought he would leave the palace, and he found a way to sneak out with a friend. And as they were going down the road, noticed an old woman who was bent over at the spine. Osteoporosis, severe osteoporosis. I used to see this in Japan, some of the older women who maybe used to work on the rice fields, bent over all day, had this same phenomenon. There's just like little L's, like bent over completely, and they can't straighten out. So he saw this and he said, "What is that?" And his friend says, "Oh, well, that's an old person." "What's an old person?" "Oh, well, we'll all get old. Every year our bodies are aging, constantly our bodies are aging, and we're all going to get old." "It looks painful. It can be very painful," he's told. So he was very surprised by this strange one. Why have I ever seen this before? He comes across a sick person, diseased. It might have been leprosy, if I recall. I'm just throwing this out from memory, so pardon me. The first time he saw disease and death. His friend explains this, and he's just utterly, soul is rocked. "You mean we're all going to die? All of us are going to suffer disease and become sick and feel this pain?" "Yes." "Will I die? Will I suffer like this?" "Absolutely. Your friends, everyone you've ever known, all of us will die. No one escapes this. All of us will feel pain and suffer." So he was so blown away. "Take me back to the palace." So Goes back to the palace and doesn't venture out for another year. He was so overwhelmed by what had occurred, by what he had seen. He ventures out again, and as he's venturing out, he realizes that his entire life up to that point had been a lie, that he was completely ill-prepared to lead the world because he did not understand anything about life or death or suffering. How could he be a great leader, an emperor, if he knew nothing about ordinary people and life itself? He was a fool. His entire life was false. Everyone he ever loved and trusted had lied to him. And he fell into a great depression. That is the dark night of the soul. The dark night of the soul occurs when what we expect to be true doesn't match reality. And with few exceptions, people rarely awaken or rarely inspired to spiritually awaken until they have suffered sufficiently, have had sufficient dark night of the soul experience, where their sense of reality and actual reality don't match up. But what they've believed has been entirely false. Pain and suffering are usually the fuel that drives us towards spiritual awakening. That is not always the case. Depends on our attitude towards it. If we would like to, if there's a voice within us, if there's that feeling within us that is eager for truth, even to the extent that the search for it may kill the body, that we would rather know the truth and die to know it, or risk death to know it, than to continue living this miserably false life and continue to feed the inner demons or feed the demons of society, metaphorically speaking. To live up to others' expectations while we know we're being false. Without that feeling inside, awakening will not occur. Most people don't have that feeling inside. So a dark night of the soul is just depression for them. For those who are eager for truth and are willing to set aside false ideas, beliefs, to question everything, a dark night of the soul can be the greatest gift. It is what fueled the Buddha. I suspect it is what fueled Jesus Christ. Note that in the Bible, Jesus was teaching in a house, and his family, his mother and his brothers, came to visit. And when he was told by one of the disciples that his family was there, that his mother and his brothers were there, Jesus ignored them and said, "No, these are my brothers and sisters, those who are here to learn, to practice these teachings. These are my brothers and sisters. These are my families." He actually disowned his family. Why would he do this? I suspect it was for the same reason that Siddhartha Gautama disowned his family, because he left his wife and his family and all that, his position and wealth, to become a hermit, to become an ascetic, to meditate without food in the mountains, in the cold, in the heat, in the elements. What would move him forward like that? The desire to understand life itself, to understand truth, to be authentic. Maybe Jesus' family was ashamed of his teachings. Maybe they were ashamed of him. He was teaching something that was quite counter to the Jewish tradition at the time, that would have been considered a rebellion by the emperor and the church leaders, or the synagogue leaders, pardon me, priests. I'm sure he had many dark nights of the soul regarding his family and the way they wanted him to live and the fact that they tried to hold him back. Dark night of the soul is what led me into the awakening process. Great suffering. So we won't look at the dark night of the soul as a bad thing. It's unpleasant, absolutely unpleasant. But just like the yin yang symbol, if we look at the black side and the white side, inside of these halves, there's a small dot of the opposite color. Within the black, there's a small dot of the white. Even in the worst suffering and pain, there's opportunity. So we look for that opportunity. We open our heart for that opportunity. For the awakening process, the desire to be honest, authentic, integrity, to return to innocence and purity, to love fully and completely, those are essential. If that's not there, or that cannot be found, the dark night of the soul is merely depression, as far as the experience goes. We may have to give up a lot of our beliefs, a lot of what we've been taught and told and held to be true in order to move forward. The difference between depression and awakening is when the individual gives those things up. I hope this helps. Blessings.